Okay, so human connection at this point in time. I feel like it's a really poignant time against, the backdrop of a global pandemic that has required most of us to be physically distant, at least from some people, if not most people. The people I've talked to have had such varied experiences throughout the pandemic. For many people, they're anticipating rejoining society or workplaces in some way. Other people, our brethren in India, are still, in the height of a crisis. For many people, they're reflecting back on the time that we've just endured to understand what they've learned about themselves and their own needs for connection. I would say, speaking for me, I've spent good pieces of time, seeking connection, and other chunks of time seeking to get away from people and looking for solitude and solace. So it's been, quite an interesting time. I think about connection a lot because I have a startup that is called Daily Haloha, and we are all about connection. And we're specifically about building the empathy that fuels and nourishes, connection. And here we are on Digital Wellness Day, and we are a piece of technology, which is interesting. I love technology, but I love humanity even more. And I believe that technology should be a tool for bringing out the best in us as humans. And the way I like to think about that and connection is that we should all feel, at home in our skin and at home in the world. And technology should be helping us with that. So that is my interest in digital wellness and connection and technology. We're going to be talking about connection and belonging and its opposite, disconnection, and the L word today. So I really thank you for showing up. It's pretty lonely to talk about loneliness all by yourself. So I'm really happy that you're here. I am going to share my screen in just a moment. I would like to introduce Stacy and Martina, who are here on the call that are part of the extended Daily Haloha family. And MCK, I'd love to consider you part of the Haloha family too. Thank you for showing up. And while I'm sharing, it'll be a little bit hard for me to look at the chat. So my colleagues are going to help me with that. Please use the chat liberally. I really want to know what you're thinking about as we go along. And I'm going to also do a poll later, so you can look forward to that. Okay, so with that, I'm going to share my screen. Okay. True connection. Everybody seeing that okay? Someone will let me know if you're not. Okay, so here's what I thought we would do with our time together today. I have not always been an entrepreneur. In fact, most of my career has been spent in corporate America, predominantly financial services and management consulting. So I want to share with you my story. It's a sticky story of how I came to this work, how I came to the work of human connection, and how that led to the development of Daily Haloha. And then we're going to dive into that L word. We can't really talk about sustainable, nourishing connection without talking about its opposite, which is loneliness. And then we'll talk about what I'm calling the social wellness stack, which is one way that I've developed to think about our need for connection and a way to unpack that. And I'll also share some tips and strategy for nourishing connection. And lastly, I'm going to leave some time for Q&A. Okay, so sticky story. The sticky story is based on Post-it notes. So what you're looking at is a collective participatory Post-it note project that emerged on the walls of a New York City subway station called Union Square, for those of you who know Manhattan. And I, at the time this project developed, was commuting into this subway station. So I spent quite a lot of time interacting with this experience, and more importantly, seeing how other people participated in this experience and what it meant to them. And frankly, I saw something that was so simple, but absolutely transformative for the people that paused and participated. So this project is called Subway Therapy. It was started by a guy named Matthew Chavez, who's an incredible human who I've come to know and consider a friend. And it just invited all these anonymous passersby to stop and pause and write a thoughtful note of hope and affirmation and contribute that to the wall. And this project emerged after the 2016 presidential election. So it was a fraught time, as we all know, a time of great divisiveness and polarization. And what I saw with this project is a rehumanizing. I saw people feel uplifted by participating in this pretty simple moment of togetherness that we were feeling so much, we're mystified about what happened to my neighbors. Who am I here? Who are we here? And this project seemed to rekindle a sense of shared humanity in just the 2 minutes it took for people to walk by and participate. So I really couldn't shake this feeling because it was so uplifting when I was feeling so heavy after the election. And it set me on a course of exploration. Is this a one-off kind of thing? Or are there other kinds of participatory projects in public places that unite anonymous strangers of this moment of seeing each other as the human collective that we are? And once I started looking for them, I saw them everywhere. This is another one that is probably the most well-known. They're called Before I Die walls. They're all over the country and all over the world. I'm curious, just like put a little note in the chat if you've ever had an opportunity to see these in your own, wanderings. But they're pretty simple. It just has a prompt across the top, before I die, and then lines that say, I want to, and everybody can contribute their reflection there. And here's a close-up. And you can really see what some of the reflections were here that were shared on this particular wall. And a question like this, before I die, what do you want to do, invites such an outpouring of humanity. It helps people connect to something that's deeply meaningful about themselves. It helps people connect to those reflections that are offered by others and see the ways in which we're unique and the ways in which we're part of this bigger human story. It crowdsources both inspiration and compassion. It's really powerful. And when people gather for a common purpose, even if they're anonymous strangers to one another, even if it's asynchronous, there's something really powerful that happens. And it's sort of like if you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. I started seeing these projects everywhere, and it brought me full circle. Here's another view of this subway therapy wall in New York City, to my own feelings when I first encountered this wall. And what I realized when I looked across all the projects that I found is that they had this same secret sauce that created this feeling of uplift and universality that I felt when I saw this wall for the first time. Here's what I've noticed. Here's what I noticed when I looked across these projects. I noticed that they created a space where everybody belonged. Everybody was welcome, and everyone mattered, and everybody was seen and heard equally. And that was enabled by the fact that there was no judgment, no room for judgment on these walls and on these bulletin boards and on these chalkboards. And there was no status. Everybody was welcome. Everybody mattered equally. There were no influencers, right? And when I started thinking about those things, it was pretty clear that that was the opposite of what social media was serving to us. Social media was promising connection, but just as often it divided us instead of united us and left us feeling sorted, silenced, anxious, instead of uplifted and connected. So I really started to understand what could happen when you replace algorithms with serendipity and replaced competition for popularity with co-creation and collaboration. And this really set me on the course of developing what was to become Daily Haloha. But what I recognized in myself was equally profound. I thought that I felt so uplifted by this experience because I was feeling the weight of the divisiveness in the aftermath of the election. But what I came to understand once I researched all these projects was that I had been yearning for a deeper sense of connection for quite a long time, before the election. And this touched something, a deeper yearning for belonging in me that I don't think I fully understood until I really did a deep dive into these projects. And when I really understood the role that social media was playing in my life and technology in general, I started to be able to kind of link and label and name the things I was feeling, and opened up the opportunity to imagine a different way of being. So I learned as much about myself as I did about participatory public art and technology in this exploration. And I'm going to stop sharing for just a minute because I want to do a quick little poll here. There's not that many of us. We could do a show of hands, but I'm going to do it as a poll. And the poll is anonymous. And is everybody seeing this? Let's see, maybe not yet. Can you see that? Yes? No?
Not yet.
Let's see. Yes? Okay. So I'm going to answer this as well. So the question is, how often do you feel lonely? Okay, couples, let's see. Everybody voted? Not yet? It'd be great if everybody could weigh in. So we got a little bit of a read from the group. Okay. All right, well, this group in particular, a little spoiler alert, can you see the results? Am I sharing? Yes? No? No, sorry. Now? Okay, thumbs up, thank you. All right, so this is the results. So spoiler alert, I'm going to share some really broad research results with you. And this group is feeling a little more connected, well, actually a lot more connected than the populace. So you're doing something already right, and I commend you, but no one is immune. Most of us, at least according to this poll, feel lonely at least some of the time. And that's part of the human condition. I wouldn't have expected anything different. So let's do a little bit of a deeper dive into loneliness. And let's start off by talking about a little bit of a definition about what loneliness is. So loneliness is a feeling, right? It's subjective. It's a feeling that there's a gap. There is a distance between what we're looking for in our personal relationships and what we have, or what we're desiring to get from our relationships and what they're offering to us. So loneliness is a gap, and it's subjective. It's this feeling that we want something that's different than what we have when it comes to our personal relationships. And it's really important to remember that it is subjective. So it's not the same as isolation, right? So isolation certainly is a word that we've heard a lot about in the pandemic. Physical isolation, physical separation, being physically distanced from other people. And loneliness is different than that, right? And you've often heard the phrase, I'm sure, feeling lonely in a crowd, right? So being in physical proximity doesn't guarantee that we're not lonely. And the opposite is also true. Being in solitude doesn't mean that we're lonely either, right? So it's really interesting to think about loneliness and solitude. And I'm just looking at my notes here because I love what I read somewhere where loneliness is the pain of being alone, but solitude is the glory of being alone, right? So thinking about loneliness and isolation and solitude, they're all very different things. But loneliness is on the rise. So you might have seen, if you follow the subject matter, that some of the more recent statistics, because everyone was quite concerned about the pandemic and the economic recession also leading to a social recession. So there's been a lot of statistics in the press lately about loneliness. But it's been on the rise for decades, really predating the pandemic. So the most recent big poll showed that 61% of Americans feel often, if not always, lonely. I mean, that's a pretty significant number, 61%. And that's up from 54% just 2 years ago. So that's a staggering number. And if around the world, it's 1 in 3. 1 in 3 adults feel lonely, often or almost always. So it really is now being considered a global crisis. And not only that, a global health crisis. And it's considered a global health crisis because the impacts of loneliness are really significant to our health. So I'm going to talk about that in a moment, but let's talk about why loneliness has been on the rise for decades. I mean, and it's very complex. There's a lot of factors, some of them very personal and some of them community and some of them societal. But with increased mobility, we tend to not live and work in community or near our families the way we did generations ago. That's a contributing factor. Technology certainly has had a big impact that we often not only can work remotely, but we're working in an environment of kind of always on culture, 24/7. Working often takes us away from the relationships that matter most to us and nourish us and make us feel connected. Another factor is cultural, especially in Western cultures where individualism is prized above community often. And we look at our relationships and in terms of what people can offer us in a transactional way. And we've lost a little bit of that fabric of togetherness and how we look at our friends and colleagues. And loneliness, in fact, is higher in Western cultures of fierce, individualism and material definitions of success. And then, of course, there's the whole backdrop of systemic issues, social inequity, and the upheavals that have come with this, which have brought about a loss of trust in our institutions and in our communities. So it's very complex. And then, of course, there's things that happen in our personal lives that are episodic, where we might have periods of loneliness because we move to a new town, or maybe we're a parent of a young child and we don't get out as much. So it's a very complex issue. And now that the impacts of loneliness are really widely acknowledged, I'm really happy to see that there's increased attention paid to the topic. So you might have seen some of the research that's been touted in the last couple of years, that there's been a really catchy headline, which is that loneliness is worse for your health than smoking 15 cigarettes a day. So that got a lot of people's attention. And there's a lot of research now that proves that loneliness has significant impacts, not only on our emotional health, but our mental health and our physical health. It harms our immune system. It is linked to increased incidence of cancer and heart disease and depression. So obviously this is worth paying a lot of attention to. The good news is that all of those negative effects can be cured. And the antidote to loneliness is its opposite, which is connection. Connections and relationships have been proven to do the opposite, enhance our immunity, they protect our mental and physical health. So that's all good news. Thinking about the pandemic, it's coming out of the pandemic in some ways, there's mixed news about what's happened with loneliness. And like the pandemic, which has affected pockets of the community in vastly different ways, loneliness has cropped up in vastly different ways as well. There's pockets of the population that are less lonely. because they now feel this sense of interconnection, and they feel in their communities, everybody pulled together as one to support each other and our frontline workers during the pandemic. And that made them feel more connected. Some people spent more time with their families than ever before, and the pandemic was actually a way to reconnect. And then, for many others, it's been a time of physical isolation that has been quite unwelcome and has resulted in a mental health crisis among, in particular, our young people and parents of young children. So it's affected pockets of the population differently, but one thing it has done universally, I believe, is destigmatized loneliness. And that is only a good thing. There's a lot more conversation about connection, the need for connection, and a lot more interventions being offered in our communities. So that's good news. Okay, enough of this, the heaviness of loneliness. Let's talk about the lighter side of connection and how we can kind of unpack that and dissect our own needs for connection. Okay, I've put something together here. It's a little wonky, but so am I. And I'm calling it the social wellness stack. And this kind of looks at our need for connection in various layers. So we all need various forms of connection, and it comes to us in different ways. So at the top here, I'm calling the top layer our intimate connections. These are usually reserved for a small number of people, our most intimate relationships. It's often our love relationships, our families. With these folks, we have deep mutual bonds built on love and trust and affection. In the next level down are our broader range of friends and family. These are our social relationships. And these are the people we turn to for fun and support. We usually share interests and often history with these folks. We turn to them because we have activities that we enjoy doing in common. These might be, we might have a girls' night out, we might be playing softball, but this is our broader array of our social connections. The next layer is our community relationships. These might be people we know well, but it might be people that we don't know well, but we come together at times united in a common purpose. We might have the same hobbies. We might have the same interests in our communities, in our civic lives. We might belong to the same faith group, right? We might have something in common based on our, identities that bring us together. So these are kind of episodic comings together around something that we have in common, where we have an affinity to other people based on common purpose or interest. And then we have the layer that I call the collective layer. This one's a little bit harder to define, but this is almost a spiritual idea or belief or knowing that we're all connected in some way, that we're all kind of inextricably linked as part of the human condition. And there are certain experiences that remind us of that. It could be experiences in nature. It could be that we're experiencing great feeling together because we're at a concert and we're hearing music that moves us, or our sports team won and we feel this kinship with all the other fans of that team. So that's this, this sort of universality feeling. And this one's really interesting in light of the pandemic, right? Because I think this layer has been really hard for us to tap into at a time of social distancing. And I'll talk more about that. And then, of course, there's the self, which is the foundation for all of our other relationships, right? So the self means self-knowledge, self-acceptance, self-compassion, and self-love. It's the relationship we have with ourselves that sets the ability for us to connect at all of these other levels. And I'm just going to read a quote here from Brené Brown. I don't know if anyone else here is a Brené Brown fan, but I love this quote. It really brings this home for me. And she says, true belonging only happens when we present our authentic, imperfect selves to the world. Our sense of belonging can never be greater than our level of self-acceptance. So that really speaks to me because our relationship with ourself and our ability to show up as ourself is really the only way to feel deep bonds of connection across all these other layers of the wellness stack. So like other things, because we're all unique individuals, our individual social wellness stack is our own personal blueprint. So it's really important that we think about for ourselves, what is our personal wellness stack and what matters most to us? Where in this stack do we derive nourishment in our relationships? And I think, for most people, they need some degree of all of these levels working for them. But for everyone, it's different. I mean, it's like physical activity where you might like to do yoga and I might like to run, and for someone else, they like team sports. It's really very different for all of us. So I invite you to think about, when you feel a greatest sense of belonging, who are you with and what are you doing? When do you feel like your best self, your most authentic self? Who are you with and what are you doing? Right? And try to think about which of these layers mean the most to you, and not try to separate what you think where you should be deriving nourishment and where you actually are. So this is an interesting, process for me. I would share with you that for me, the most important parts of the stack are the intimate layers and the kind of collective and part of that community layer. And frankly, it took me a while to understand that because I am a very social person. But I'm also an introvert and I need time. So that self layer is also very important. I need time with myself to recharge and reset. But this collective layer is really important to me. And I think that that's why those Post-it notes spoke to me so poignantly, because I need to feel like I'm part of a bigger human story and that I'm in flow of humanity. And it's interesting during pandemic times because what we had trouble connecting with as we're social distancing is those kind of loose ties. I don't know if you've heard that phrase, but it's the people that we often don't even know, but they're part of the fabric of our days. Like they might be the person who checks us in at the gym, or the barista at our favorite coffee shop, or that person that we wave to on our way, in our car on our way to work that we don't know, but we always pass at 8:30 a.m. And for me, those little daily connections help me feel kind of in the flow of life, because I do spend a lot of time alone. And that's been really challenged during the pandemic. So I invite you to think about these things. And later on, we're going to put in the chat, I have a handout associated with this social wellness stack and some exercises and some questions that you could think about, and about how this relates to yourself. So we'll leave that in the chat for you later, but I invite you to think about what matters to you in this stack, and then how that maps to where you're putting your energy, and where might there be gaps. Are you over investing in layers that aren't providing great nourishment to you, and are you maybe under prioritizing others that really can be dialed up for you, to feel more connected. So we will leave that for you in a bit. So now I wanted to talk, I think I'm going to stop for a moment and rejoin you. And I just want to maybe invite some thoughts about the social wellness stack for you. I'm going to share with you in a minute some tips, but I'm kind of curious for this group if people feel like they're needing more breadth in their relationships, which is maybe the base of that stack, or maybe more depth in their relationship, which might mean investing more in a fewer number of people at the top of the stack. Does anyone have any thoughts about breadth versus depth in their own life and where they're feeling like they maybe want to spend more attention? Any thoughts on that? Melanie, breadth, everyday connections with strangers. Yeah, I really connect with that, Melanie. If that's something that you're interested in, I'll point you in the direction of a really terrific Atlantic article. I have to think of the name of it. It's the Atlantic magazine. They did an article, I think this winter, and it's about this idea of loose ties. And during pandemic, many of us kind of were hunkering down if we were so lucky with our families. And we're so worried about losing connection with the people that matter most to us, that's where by necessity, we had to put our energies there. But we're missing the community. We're missing those loose ties and those everyday, even chance, those chance meetings with others and serendipity and finding yourself hunkered down on a street corner with a stranger under an umbrella waiting to cross, which really happened to me. So yeah, and Martina, the breadth. Yeah, missing the breadth. And from Sunny, the shoulds on the breadth, but would rather focus on the intimate. Thank you for sharing that, Sunny. Yeah, the idea of shoulds resonates with me too. In fact, I would say for me personally, a silver lining of the pandemic was that I didn't have to do some of those shoulds. Some of those shoulds went away. In my business life, I often felt those shoulds about social networking and maybe turning up at social events because of a business opportunity. And those things getting quiet actually was really nice. Really nice for me. So I understand about the shoulds. And for Sherry too, the depth. Thank you for that. Oh, Michael, MCK, amazing. Thank you for sharing that article. Did you already know of that article or did you just find it right now? No, you just found it. You're the best. All right, so some breadth and some depth, which just sort of reinforces the point that, we all, need something different in our stack. So, and Sunny, yeah, grateful for the downtime. So clearly we can have a very rich discussion. I'm going to go through one more slide with you with some tips, and then I'd like to come back together and have us unmute and maybe chat a little bit more about your thoughts on some strategies that have worked for you and some that I've shared so that we can all leave with something kind of actionable today. Okay, I'm going back to sharing. And thank you for that thumbs up, by the way. Okay, so here are some social wellness tips. This first one, prioritize quality time. I know quality time is a little overplayed, but I think it has, particular relevance right now, while we're still not fully integrated back in the lives we're accustomed to. And it certainly has a lot of relevance today on Digital Wellness Day when we're talking about technology. So what is quality time? Well, when I think about quality time, I really think about presence, really being present for other people, one-on-one certainly, or even in small groups. And it's hard to be present. I mean, it's really hard. I don't know about you, but I have all the different loops going in my mind, thinking about what just happened and what's going to happen. It's really a concerted effort, to slow down in time, in space, and be there for the people that you're, in conversation with, whether it's over a screen or, face to face. And speaking of screens, unplugging is so helpful in being present for someone. I don't know if anyone else saw the research, but there's this fascinating research that, even the presence of a cell phone on a table or even in a room when you're with somebody else takes away from the intimacy of that conversation. So getting rid of devices, if at all possible, is a really big step closer to quality time with others. Another thing I would share here is the idea of sharing space versus sharing experiences. I was talking to a friend who was told me, I've never spent so much time with my husband during the pandemic, and I've never felt so distant from him either. Because sometimes it's like, where you see that box has been in the corner for so long, like you stop seeing it. So being in physical proximity doesn't mean quality time either. So I encourage you to schedule time with the people that really matter, right? I think, Sherry, you were saying like intimate time. And again, scheduling that time, creating shared experiences, being planful goes a long way in making other people feel cherished. So those are some thoughts there. Number two, belong to yourself, right? That's that bottom layer of belonging to yourself first, because without belonging to yourself, you're not really fully available to others. So I encourage you to invest in yourself, whatever that means, whether that means some mindful practices in your life, doing some deeper work and understanding if you've got barriers to connecting with others. I encourage you to seek solitude. It's so interesting what I've learned from a lot of our daily Haloha app participants about this during the pandemic. I've asked a few questions of our audience along the way about what they've learned about themselves during the pandemic. And many people with vulnerability have offered that they realize that they have busied themselves away from themselves, right? And that in an always on, going to work, commuting, busy lives, it's sort of a distraction, and it's kept them one step away from having to do some looking inward. And that the pandemic has actually been a time of reconnecting with self. So hopefully we don't need a pandemic to be reminded to look inward, spend that time, find solitude, and do some of the work that makes us feel like we belong to ourselves. Okay, number three, on Digital Wellness Day, got to talk about minding your technology. So for those of you who have participated in other digital wellness talks today, you might have already talked about some of these things, but for me, the most important thing is intention, right? So there's attention, which is cherish. We need to cherish and hold on to and protect. And there's intention, which is using technology in a purposeful, meaningful way, and making sure that it doesn't bleed into all aspects of our lives and actually take us away from the relationships that matter most. So using technology in a purposeful, intentional way, I think is the most important message here. And I would also invite you to try to get in touch with how you feel after using technology. So I'm coming off a Zoom call that was 2 people, 10 people, 20 people, 100 people. How am I feeling? Why am I feeling? I've been scrolling on Instagram. Was it fun? Am I inspired? Am I deflated? Am I feeling FOMO? So take note of your various technology uses and how it feels. I love technology. I mean, but I don't love all technology. I have found Marco Polo, for example, which has been a wonderful way for me to stay in touch with my sisters during the pandemic. And I found that that's been a really positive experience. I also kind of went off the deep end on Clubhouse, and I'm finding that I come off Clubhouse not feeling very good. So it's all individual. So just take stock of how you feel, and then that should direct your future intentions. Okay, make the first move. This might be something that you haven't come across, but this is something that I've learned in my exploration about connection and loneliness. So loneliness is a really interesting state of being because it puts us in a stress response, and it actually puts us in a frame of mind where we become more antisocial, and limits our ability to connect with people even further. So it can encourage us to almost downward spiral. And some of the mindset that creeps in when you're feeling disconnected is kind of bad about yourself, maybe unworthy, maybe a little ashamed and like a little reluctant to put yourself out there. It could put you in a state of judgment. Oh, they don't like me anyway. They never did. They never reach out. I'm always the one, right? So it can put you in this frame of mind, and you really have to be careful, about that if you're feeling lonely. So my encouragement here is to make the first move, right? So let's get rid of scorekeeping, and technology helps us keep score. They didn't like my Facebook post. I always like their Facebook post. I'm always the first one texting them. They don't text me. So technology kind of makes it a little too easy to keep score. So I invite you to make the first move, reach out, just reach out. And if they don't respond back, that's okay, right? So this is another thing to remember is you don't know how someone else is feeling. Everyone's carrying a burden that we know nothing about. So if you're feeling a little disconnected, make the first move, reach out. No, it's never the wrong thing to do. It's always welcome, and it's never too late. So those are some things that I've learned. Okay, cultivate community. This is a great one because communities are actually in a lot of ways on decline. People are less involved than ever before in civic communities, in faith-based communities, in a lot of ways in society. Community comings together are less. So this really takes, practice and to cultivate communities in your lives. And the most powerful one are when you can be in community with people that have the same passions that you do. So seek out people that care about what you care about, and technology actually is a great way to do this. Facebook groups, as much as I have a quarrel with Facebook groups have served me personally really well. Volunteering is a fantastic way to cultivate community. Volunteering has been proven to be so uplifting to partake in, especially if you're feeling a little isolated or alone. Volunteering is a surefire way to feel better and feel more connected. So I encourage you to volunteer, be curious, seek out other people that share your passions. Sorry, just doing a time check. Okay, I'm going to wrap it up here so we can chat for a minute. Seek out transcendent moments. This is that idea of collective uplift, right? So when we come together in moments of great feelings of awe, feelings of joy, even feelings of grief, they remind us of our interconnectedness, being in nature, being in the presence of art. It's all different for each of us. But if those things matter to you, it's been hard during the pandemic, but I invite you just to try to, reconnect to those moments. Creativity and curiosity goes such a long way in feeling connection. Anyone who knows me well knows that I love to ask questions. Questions are such an invitation. Get a deck of question cards if you want. Use it as a conversation starter around the dinner table. Board game, any kind of games, right? Bring something new, bring something fresh, bring something surprising into the mix with your intimate relationships and into your community. Sometimes we can find ourselves in a rut, and we can feel a little bit disconnected just because we need to be jarred out of complacency. So I invite you to do that. And the very last, but hardly least one is to establish rituals. Rituals are so powerful as connection tools. There's rituals for ourselves that connect us to ourselves, and there's rituals with our loved ones and our even extended communities that connect us together. They're so powerful because they create a pause, right? They're planned, they're scheduled often, they take us out of the day-to-day. They're a pause that with great intention. Rituals bring us into the present. And if it's a shared ritual, it aligns us and our minds and our hearts and often our bodies, if it's physical, around a common ritual. They are super powerful. So whether it's personal, friends and family, or work, I invite you to think about rituals that can be meaningful in your lives. Okay, I am going to rejoin you now. Okay, and please feel free to come off of mute if you're on mute. And I invite any comments or questions about anything that I've shared or whatever is just on your heart right now. Oh, it's nice to see you, Sherry. Welcome.
Hi. Great talk. So, yeah, I really enjoyed it. And I think when I was, what I was thinking about was the importance of, being the first to initiate, because oftentimes many people just don't think about it. So you just have to put yourself out there.
Yeah, thank you for, with vulnerability, I offer to you all that I have definitely fallen into the trap of it's your turn.
Yeah.
It's always me, right? It's your turn. And, I've had to sort of challenge myself to get beyond that. Again, you never know what's on the other end of that thing.
Right.
And I've learned that a lot during the pandemic. And I've done a lot more just, haven't talked to you in 5 years. I just want you to, no need to answer. I just want you to know you're on my mind.
Right.
Such a long way.
Yeah. Yeah, that's where keeping the scorecard doesn't help very much, because like I had you over last, or, I'm always inviting over or doing this. And one of the things that I realized is, like, when something's taken away from you, like those get-togethers and having that opportunity of inviting people over, it's like all of a sudden you really miss it a lot. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to just start inviting people over now because I want to connect that way.
Yeah. Yeah. I think someone else did say in the chat, let me see that, Sunny, right? You're grateful for the downtime on the social from the pandemic. It's just so interesting how the pandemic, for most people, brought into bold relief what they're missing and what they're not missing. And it'll be just so interesting to see how we all, recalibrate now that for many of us, things are opening up, loosening up, what we want to carry forward with us into the new normal, and what we're happy to kind of, keep in the past and not reintroduce into our lives.
Yeah, I think for me, I had kind of the opposite reaction where I've always considered myself more of an introvert and like needed a lot of downtime to recover from socialization. But with the pandemic, I actually felt myself acknowledging, like, wow, I actually, even though downtime is really important to me, in-person socialization is also extremely important to me on a level I hadn't really acknowledged before. So as things come back to normal, I think I'm going into that with a sense of like a renewed realization of like just how important talking to people and seeing people in person every day, even strangers and acquaintances, how important that is to me.
Mm. Yeah, it really was a litmus test, I think, for what matters most. Yeah. Any other thoughts? Any other questions for me?
So, Amy, I have a question about, first of all, I want to thank Shri, because if it wasn't for her, I wouldn't have known about today and I wouldn't have had this awesome opportunity. But second, the social wellness stack I thought was super cool. And I was just wondering visually, as you were representing that, I saw there were like different chunks in different ways. And I wondered if that was just let's make it all different for each one, or if there was any particular intention around that, or yeah, just some more thinking of how you chose to come up with that, and then also how to visualize that.
Thank you for your question. Are you referring to like the specific visualization of each of the sections?
Mm-hmm.
There's logic to the order, the sequence from kind of top to bottom, which is sort of narrow, intimate to broader, and then self, which I really look at as the foundation for all the other layers. But in terms of the colors and the shapes of the segments, no, that was an artistic expression that maybe maybe it even underserves the purpose. It was more just so you could see all the different layers. So,
okay, cool.
Oh, and thank you. If you look in the chat, there's the handout of the social wellness stack and some of like kind of associated materials if you're interested in that. And I'm going to put my email in the chat in case that doesn't work for anyone. Please feel free just to reach out to me directly and I'll send that along to you. Or if the Google Drive doesn't work and you want me to just send you a PDF, I'm happy to do that if that's helpful. You're welcome, Melanie. Any other thoughts or questions? No, okay. Well, we're just exactly at time here. I so appreciate you joining me today to talk about connection and social wellness. And I think it was called Togetherness and Solitude because I think I've come to really understand that connection is it's so important to think about connection to self as the basis for connection to others. So I really look at them as two sides of the same coin. So thank you. I really appreciate your time and attention. I invite anyone to reach out who wants to be in further conversation or wants any other resources on these topics. And I wish you all a wonderful weekend. Happy Friday. Bye, everybody.